are you today? Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Sarah. I am editor of the HR World. We are here today to discuss the metaverse and HR, which is a topic we at the HR World have been hearing a lot about, and to be honest, using the Google quite a lot to find out what it is actually all about. So we are very grateful today to be joined by two people who are hopefully going to be teaching us, imparting their wide expertise and knowledge on what the metaverse is, and specifically how we can use it to best effect when we are in the workplace, and especially from an HR leader perspective, how to draw this into the strategy. So welcome today, both of you.
Thank you for having us.
Hello.
Hello. Lloyd, would you like to introduce yourself first, please?
Yeah, I'm Lloyd. I'm Principal Consulting at PA Consulting. My passion's around HR tech, future of work, learning and development. I've been working with VR and AR for about 7 or 8 years, mainly in the front end, so looking forward to sharing that experience with you today.
Fantastic. And Alexander?
I'm Alex. I'm a consultant also at PA. My focus is around sales and marketing technology and helping organizations understand how they can engage with their audiences in different ways. I've been dabbling in kind of VR and Metaverse probably for the last 9 months or so. So sitting here to ably support Lloyd and you, Sarah, on this journey into the unknown.
Ooh, boldly going. I'm very excited. Mostly because I know absolutely nothing about it. But Lloyd, do you want to tell us a little bit about PA consulting as well, please, before we kick off?
Absolutely. PA Consulting, 4,000 employees, primarily UK, Nordics, and US. We bring ingenuity to life is what we do. We're an end-to-end digital innovation consulting firm. Can help organizations design their next innovative toothbrush, all the way through to these types of conversations, helping organizations navigate their way into all things digital innovation and what it means for them, and more importantly, how they can implement and execute these things.
Fantastic. It sounds like we've got the right people for the job, which is great, because when we spoke last week, I was in a bit of a tiz, I have to say. There's been so much hype around the metaverse. It does feel like it's a little bit of a fad. And when I thought, well, obviously take to Wikipedia to find out what the internet is saying. And this is the intro. The intro is, in futurism and science fiction, the metaverse is a hypothetical iteration of the internet as a single, universal and immersive virtual world that is facilitated by the use of virtual reality and augmented reality headsets. In colloquial use, i.e. in common parlance, a metaverse is a network of 3D virtual worlds focused on social connection. I don't know if anyone...
Done.
I mean, there you have it.
Yeah, exactly, done. That's it, over. I mean, it was fantastic to speak to you guys, because I really did need a little bit of guidance. And I think the first point, the first place that we kicked off really was, it's been hailed a little bit like these technological solutions always come at us a bit like, it's the second coming, that everything's going to solve all our problems. And then we hear other pieces of information such as, Facebook, the most recognized brand in the world almost, is changing its name to Meta for some reason. I personally got really confused as to whether it was a capital M or a small m when we were writing it in our copy. I mean, so many questions. I mean, the first thing I would guess I want to just open up is, do you think this is a fad? Is this going to just come and go like so many other technological solutions before them?
I suppose in the tech world, anything could, in theory, be a fad. For me, in my experience, the reason for that is there's a lot of hype, a lot of promotion, a lot of sensationalism, and a lack of this is the actual impact. This is the difference and the change it's making. In this space, I think the fact that Meta changed the name from Facebook, and we've seen Mark Zuckerberg go all in, dare I say, looking a bit awkward at times in certain videos, really trying to make that connection, is one thing. It gets people's attention. The other thing not to avoid, though, is I mentioned earlier I've been working with virtual reality in particular since 2014-15. Back then, it was very expensive, extremely expensive. You had cables coming out everywhere. You needed powerful computers to support that. And if we go to today, you can go to your local Argos store and pick up an Oculus Quest, Oculus who owned the one Alex has shown here, and pick up for £300, completely wireless, so that we can't avoid that the technology is more readily available and it can be applied to many different contexts. But for sure, it could be a fad if people are using it for the wrong reasons in a business or HR context as well. So that's my viewpoint.
And I think to build on that, you know, when the internet was born, everybody said it wouldn't work. When Steve Jobs presented the first iPhone, everybody said it wouldn't work. And if you're familiar with Gartner and their infamous hype cycle graphs, everything kind of shifts along. So from, you know, our perspective, and, you know, to what Lloyd was saying, I think this is as much one needs to step away from the hype in the market. I believe, this is personal view, that Facebook needed to rebrand because of the challenges the brand was facing. And Zuckerberg and the team were very clever in choosing the word meta, because Sarah, you and your audience may have seen the post I did yesterday with Google Trends. So you go to Google Trends, put in Metaverse. Up until October 21, Metaverse was not being searched really on Google. October 21, you see a massive spike in people searching the internet for Metaverse. When did Facebook rebrand to Meta? October 21. And now we're starting to see it tail off in terms of Google Trends. And this is hopefully what today is all about, is stepping away from the hype we see in the press. However, some of it is important and we need to give consideration. And to Lloyd's point, how can your audience start to understand it? And more importantly, what might it mean for you, your business, your employees? How might you use this technology as a medium to do all different types of things?
Fantastic, and those are really good questions. And I think now that we have quite a number of our audience joining us today, we are going to do some polls. I believe my lovely assistant Alex is about to set them live. So for everybody, that should be in your chat box now. And I think what we're going to look at here are, you know, whether people know what the metaverse is, whether they feel like the metaverse is, whether or not they have ever been in the metaverse, and whether or not they are planning to use the metaverse in the workplace. I mean, one of the things that I had been struggling with, I guess, is we have all been living in this, what I would consider hyper sort of crazy technological space since the pandemic. We've all become experts at so many things that, you know, many of us, I would say Luddites, and even though I work in the communications industry, have, you know, would never have sort of, you know, would always have chosen a phone call over a video call, all of the things that we sort of now take for granted. And I sort of said to you guys, I was like, what's, you know, what does it really look like? And actually, Alex, you were brilliant at bringing it to life. And I love your LinkedIn. If you are looking for ways to really understand this in a really creative way, both Lloyd and Alexander have the best LinkedIn explanations and some really good interactive ways of understanding what all this means. And it would be brilliant to look at the video that you showed us, if possible. And again, we are with live new technology as well, so hopefully this is going to work. And Alexander, please do talk us through this in the sense of what's the background to this?
What's going on here?
What's going on?
What the hell is going on here? So this is Meta's Horizon Workrooms. So this is their equivalent of Teams, Zooms, GoToWebinar, and so on. And as we were saying kind of in the green room, it's really hard to articulate what this is until you actually experience it. So what we're seeing here is, I do a video every Friday, but you can bring your physical laptop into the virtual world that is a Horizon Workroom here. So I am now presenting from my physical laptop a video in a virtual meeting room to try and kind of bring this to life. So for me, if we kind of park the metaverse conversation for a moment and focus on what you can kind of do here and now, is this for me is, in very simplistic terms, the next iteration of Teams, Zoom, GoToWebinar, and how you might collaborate. But it's not so far removed, because you can bring your PowerPoint, you can bring your presentations, you can bring your your two-dimensional kind of laptop, if you will, into this three-dimensional world to communicate, collaborate in a different, more immersive way. But as I said, it's very hard to articulate what this looks and feels like until you've actually put on the headset and entered this domain, as it were.
Yeah. And I mean but that really did bring it to life, because I have experienced VR before, and in a way, for some reason, I hadn't actually really properly put the two things together, in the sense that you're in a live VR environment essentially. There was a brilliant piece in the FT around virtual clubbing, which I really like the idea, just everyone randomly dancing in their kitchens with a headset on. But at the moment, actually talking kitchen, I wish I was in a virtual reality, because I'm getting my kitchen done. So my house isn't out, so I'd quite like to wander around, seeing not the rubble. I mean, I think that, you know, in terms of that working, I think that really helps. I hope that hopefully that's kind of connected with the audience. We have some feedback from the responses on the on our questions, and we have, yeah, probably around about 2/3 of people kind of think they know what the metaverse is, with yeah, a third, maybe even more than that, saying no, or they don't know. Have you ever been in the metaverse? That figure dramatically flips. So only about yeah, about 5 to 7% have been in the metaverse, which I think says quite a lot. And are we thinking about using it in a workplace? So at the moment, yeah, that's about a third yes and 2/3 no. So do those statistics kind of surprise you, or is that kind of what you would have expected?
I think for me, it's kind of maybe what I would have expected, because there's still, you reference Wikipedia, right? There's still no definite definition, if you like, but everyone can agree. I think that it does show where we're at with this space. But the example Alex showed a minute ago, in the metaverse, probably what we might see in 6 to 12 months, maybe this webinar in the room that Alex just showed, actually engage with other folk. And the kind of comparison to virtual reality, if we were to iterate, is virtual reality extensions and apps are kind of very singular, i.e. not always connected, especially if you've done them in the workplace and they've been designed by an organization with that purpose. That's the key part of the metaverse journey for people to really get. It's an extension of the web. We are connected.
And I think that's it as well, isn't it? I've never really, and this again is my own personal situation, but I've never really seen the web as a place to go and be connected in a way. I think that's the bit that kind of, again, linking up. Obviously, it's a massive connector, but the real lifeness of it, in the sense that you're kind of going to using it for so many different reasons. You know, even when you get into Facebook and you have that connected sort of element of the interaction with people, putting it into sort of a 3D environment somehow takes it to another level.
Well, the experience we've got here, take no offense, but it's very limited in the 2D sense, right? You spoke always, you know, about your cat spewing up on your feet the other day, right? If we were all fully immersed, we might get an experience. There might be a richer experience. And in the working space, one of the things that we all spoke about at the start of the pandemic was, and it's a cliche phrase, but it's very true, how do we recreate that kind of water cooler moment where employees can connect, and we don't just have to dial in 15 minutes and go through specific things. That's the opportunity with the metaverse in particular, one of them.
So, I mean, it feels to us then, looking at this in the round at the moment, and please at this stage, everybody, please feel that you can jump in with any questions. There is a questions box should be on your screen. What we want to do today is really gauge where people are on their journeys as well, and sort of try and answer any questions. So we've got 45 minutes booked in, but we can run over, so please do get involved. Yeah, David is saying the metaverse doesn't exist, so how can we be there? The metaverse is an open, impenetrable place. So we might
that might trigger some of the metaverse pros online in terms of what have you. And I guess I did a podcast with a Dutch fellow. We can send the links in afterwards. He described the metaverse as, it's almost a place where we can roam freely. So at the moment, if we think about the way the internet is constructed, when you're on Facebook, Facebook owns you. When you're on LinkedIn, LinkedIn owns you. You can't take that persona into other environments. If you're on Second Life, if your children play Roblox, if you're doing any kind of gaming, all the skins, all the stuff you buy with that environment fundamentally remain with that environment. The idea of the metaverse, which is kind of underpinned by the concepts of Web 3.0, we're not going to go down that route, is that you can create your digital self and then you can move into those different environments and take that with you. So think of it as to how we travel around the world. Your passport is you, as it were, in paper format. That allows you access per se, and then you can move around into the different countries where each country has its own kind of rules and regulations, but fundamentally you're still you in the different countries. That is the way, that is the vision of the purists in terms of what the metaverse is that you can take your digital self wherever you choose to go and cross those boundaries and those borders. That for me is probably, yes, that has people implications, but that's for government and society to deal with. I believe in terms of what's relevant from an HR perspective is how might you use the concepts of the metaverse, which is fundamentally accessed through virtual reality. There'll be people out there that argue that the metaverse isn't VR, but for the sake of today, fundamentally to access a metaverse world is primarily through VR. How might organizations consider the impact of that medium as a way to communicate, collaborate internally across your organizations? That's how I see the debate, or how I feel the debate should unfold internally within businesses, rather than getting swept up into, as Lloyd was saying, Zuckerberg's vision of what he believes the metaverse is.
Yeah, I really like that actually. And in fact, we have got somebody watching, Tom, hi, from his Horizon workroom, who's already in the metaverse apparently. So we are right on the edge of cutting edge technology. I mean, it does come to life, I think, when we start to, like you were saying, Alex, about when you start to think about the applications in, for want of a better term, real life. So where do you, you know, we've got Rachel as well has asked this as well in terms of examples, and she's specifically asking about how this work in recruitment. But if we broaden that out a little bit to say, you know, where is it best being used at the moment? Where are you seeing real, as you had said, Lloyd, impact?
Yeah, sure. So in the HR space, there's quite a few examples. So I mean, me in particular, in a previous company during the pandemic, was tasked with a number of folk and the director involved with the property strategy of this organisation. They wanted to reduce obvious costs and everything, and wanted to go and explore how to replicate buildings and an environment in the metaverse. So that, and as they were not the only organisation doing this, I think Alex is aware of a couple of legal firms that are already participating in this space. And then we get into the space of collaboration, this kind of gut, for want of a better term, of trying to, you know, we all work remotely, but we'll come into the office, but we all probably want to come into the office on a Tuesday, Wednesday or Thursday, and there's limited rooms, how we can collaborate in that space and still use the same tools. That's one example. In another organization, we looked at team meetings. So we've mentioned a few apps. One of the apps we use is an app called Spatial, where it's a bit more open, but you're still limited to a room. You could have PowerPoint and whatnot. So we went on a journey as a team. We had team meetings, we had one-to-ones, and we were, you know, talking about team meeting type stuff and team building. And what really struck me was the ability to engage, but also that actually we couldn't, like you're nodding here, Alex is blinking, I can pick up and get that feedback. Currently in some of these applications, you can't get that feedback. So that's, it's being explored and being used, but an area to progress. But then also around training in particular and high risk environments. So if the article I wrote for you guys recently, one of the examples I gave was around Boeing and the issues with the Max 73 7. I've got my technicalities right. What struck me though was Boeing made a decision not to engage folk in training because of the time, investment, etc., involved. Whereas in a metaverse world, imagine we don't have to wait and book in simulations. We can go, pilots can go through their training, but in the moment get feedback in real time, in real life from experts. The technology needs to go somewhere so you can get some haptic feedback. So when I pull the cockpit and I steer and everything, I get that type of feedback. But there are some examples of things that are happening, but also where they could go in the future as well. And I have a whole host of other examples, but I'll kind of pause for a probing question.
Yeah, I mean, I think examples are really good. I mean, I know that was, when you sort of were talking about, I suppose it's kind of the application of it, but also is there a kind of type of person or a type of organization that's more likely to be taking this up? Where are the early adopters? That's my technical term. And where are you seeing business follow, if you like? What's been the natural progression?
Well, I think early adopters, the fact that VR technology has been around since the 70s and the 80s, this is not a new concept. To Lloyd's point, it's just iterated to a point now where it's more affordable. Where we're seeing it's manufacturing, health and life sciences. So you're already seeing surgeons training surgeons around the world. So rather than them all going to a theatre, the surgeon is doing it through VR, and then people can watch that, and etc. Manufacturing is a big play. So Microsoft Mesh, if you put that into your search engine, and you can see what Microsoft is doing in terms of how they want to iterate teams, and that's happening today. Where we're seeing it more broadly is larger organizations, where maybe you've got an international client, an international employee base, to Lloyd's point, then bringing that together. The question on recruitment, some firms we're now seeing in terms of using this as onboarding or graduate fairs, in terms of creating, they can't have a physical graduate fair, so they have a virtual graduate fair and come in that way. And again, relatively easy to do, because we all have one of these things. You put a cardboard box around it, and that creates a vague, not as an actual cardboard box, you get a piece of marketing, you put your phone in, and that creates a similar experience to something like this. So it's those types of applications, I guess, in the more day-to-day where we are seeing that. And to the point around recruitment, there's a bizarre post on LinkedIn the other day about, are you hiring Gen Z? I mean, what a dumb question to be asking. If you're not hiring Gen Z, then you're gonna have a real succession challenge in the future. This is also more normal for that generation coming into the workplace. I'm certainly not advocating that we spend 8 hours a day with our headsets on, far from it, but one has to give some consideration that the next generation of employee coming through, this is more normal. But to Lloyd's point, I'm seeing lawyers use it, embrace it, having there's an attorney called Mitch Jackson. Find Mitch Jackson on LinkedIn, and he's a sole practicing attorney in Florida, I think, has one-to-one client meetings in spatial, I think it is. So the other thing to give consideration is around the experience. So as this becomes more mainstream and organizations start to get their head around this, those that start to use VR as a medium to engage will start to set the benchmark in terms of what that candidate experience might be, what that employee experience might be, what that potential client experience might be. They will then set the expectation, and then other organizations in the same industries are going to have to start to move pretty quickly to get to that point. Will this be in 6 months' time? Maybe not. 12 months' time, to Lloyd's point, possibly. Next 5 years, I would say it will become more mainstream as a way to interact. I mean, Accenture, for example, announced on LinkedIn last week they're going to get 60,000 headsets for all their grads, and they're going to spend day one in VR. So now that might not be relevant for some of your audience here when you've got a PA Consulting or an Accenture or those kind of firms that are doing this, because that's kind of what we do. But from an experiential perspective, that's also the consideration that one needs to be given as an employer, especially if you want to be an employer of choice.
And just to build on that, and your question, Sarah, for me, it's the type of person or the organization. Two things really stand out: purpose and patience. So why do you want to get involved with this? If you're doing it for the sake of it, if another tool in your HR tech ecosystem can solve this problem, then use that tool, because it's in that scenario where it becomes a fad, essentially. So spend time, the organizations who are spending time really discovering what's going on in their organization. What are the niche problems we can't solve today? Or maybe future strategy. Where do we want to be in 2025? Where do we want to be in 2030? I think mapping out against that, but the patience also being that this technology is going to iterate and evolve. Certainly those who understand it quicker and get to that place a lot sooner than others will benefit from it in the longer term.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting, because it is that point at which, at what stage do you what different companies, what do they need to do to go about, and Rachel's asked this as well, go about introducing the metaverse as a concept, but then also the software into an organization to make it work?
So I would step away from the conversation about the metaverse, because what that immediately, you think Facebook, you think Zuckerberg, you think gaming, you think not relevant. I would focus on the concept of the medium of virtual reality being the next iteration of Teams and Zoom and this environment. But absolutely, to Lloyd's point, it has to be relevant for the purpose in which you're trying to engage. And it could well be you have employees, like I think it was Richard who said his name was, or Tom, forgive me, who's kind of already on there. You may have employees who have an Oculus headset or a Hive headset or what have you, and play table tennis or like Beat Saber, and are doing this from a personal capacity. Work with them to think about how might you bring this into the day job, as it were, and don't even necessarily mention it. Kind of do a bit of Google X, kind of break yours, whatever Google do, or Amazon's kind of disrupt ourselves. Just try and have a one-to-one meeting in a Horizon workroom or in Spatial, and touch it, feel it. Then you really will start to go, okay, now I've touched it and felt this. To Lloyd's point, we're really struggling with this particular challenge situation. I wonder if this medium, this environment might help facilitate this in a different way.
No, I understand, yeah. And I think that that I suppose takes a certain kind of thinking in the first place, is a willingness to go into that framework from any angle, from a personal angle. I mean, it is actually very personal as well, isn't it, in the sense that it's about the individual. It's not just about the technology, or it's actually how you interact as a human, which is the bit that I'm kind of getting my head around, actually. Which and so I guess with that in mind, what do you see, or what do you come across as being like the major challenges to uptake? So when you're actually dealing with organizations, are there any sticking points either to the initial uptake, or kind of when they've actually integrated it into the organization?
Yeah, I mean, I can share some examples. I think I have a whole host of things here, but I'll try and limit them. The first thing for me in HR or learning world is it's a new world without boundaries, right? So one of the challenges, we're just going to try and duplicate this experience.
Yeah.
What's the point? So, and that's going to take time. There's going to be a killer app, a killer experience. We might laugh at the example now, but when the iPhone came out a few years after, WhatsApp did, and that kind of completely changed how people communicated. Angry Birds, whatever you might want to consider, there'll be a killer app that draws people to it. But the key point there is just don't replicate this current understanding. So in a learning sense, please don't go and create e-learning in VR, the metaverse. Please, as a pledge. I think ultimately it's change though. organizations are going to need, and people, the human aspect, people are going to need support with this. We did a project in a nuclear power station a number of years ago, first of a kind globally. What we realized is some folk were not prepared and ready to be fully immersed. And so we have to design other experiences to differentiate and include them. The inclusivity of this is going to be an important conversation, which kind of one of my final point is going from 0 to 100 is a risk. Technologies such as augmented reality, mixed reality, whereby you are seeing a different part of the world and interacting with the world, overlaying digital aspects, for a nice bridge maybe to some of the things we're talking about. Alex, I don't know if you've got any others as well.
I echo everything that you say, Lloyd. I would suggest the other aspects is the UX of, so the user experience of a lot of these platforms is not that straightforward, should I say. And you do need to be, it's all very well going, we're going to send one of these to your home, but you still need to be relatively technically savvy to be able to get them set up, to get logged in. And if you remember the challenges that organizations had when we had to flip to Zoom, to Teams and all that malarkey. And now we are in an environment where one click, you click a link and you're off to the races for the most part. The software to support this stuff is not quite there yet in terms of an ability just to put the headset on and off to the races takes a bit of learning. And what you don't want to happen is you present this to somebody, they can't get it to work first time. And this is any technology platform out there, right? Can't get it to work first time. Oh, this isn't very good. It's never going to work. So I'm now going to poo-poo it. And anybody that talks to me internally about this technology, I'm going to say it's really bad. It didn't work first time. I don't see why we're doing this. So back to Lloyd's point, this is a people and change challenge / opportunity enabled by technology, but the technology is evolving on a daily basis, subject to how it's seeing the humans interact with the varying platforms, which is now spinning up all sorts of things in terms of sexual harassment, risk to children, all the stuff that we unfortunately see that has been created by a certain social network is unfortunately going to translate more broadly into a 3D environment.
Yeah, I mean, that was obviously something that what my research threw up as well is the sense of there are these boundaries around this in the in the same way that there is with anything, and kind of some of the dangers. I mean, my son already sits in front of his computer, yada yada, 13 years old, what do I do? The idea that we would all then sort of migrate into a virtual world where all of these different things are happening, and how what's the legal situation around this, and I think you kind of had touched a little bit on it before, but I think there's this, there is a fear, isn't there, in the sense that it is an uncharted territory, and especially for younger people coming into this world is, more isolation, more mental health problems. There are some of those things that have been flagged up. I mean, obviously that's not necessarily in a workplace setting, but can you ever, how do you see that kind of, I guess, integration of the actual regulation of these sorts of ideas, or technologies rather?
I think it's so important. With kids myself as well, who were invested in tech. I don't know where to get it from, but it's you're right, it's unregulated, because Alex talks about the experience of what happens in social media, which we don't need to talk about, but taking that from a 2D world to a 3D world where you're fully immersed and feeling that. So the NSC, I believe, have put together a white paper with some strong recommendations on how they believe the metaverse should be regulated, and some key aspects in there. We just need this conversation on this topic to continue, right, and get these things in place.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of, I mean, have you seen anything go wrong? I'm quite interested in the sort of the quirky, the fun aspect of it, where things have just gone absolutely terribly wrong from a VR perspective.
A few examples, the one where folk didn't want work in a work centre, didn't want to put it on, so we had to think about their experience. That was one. I mentioned the team meetings we had where we couldn't see the facial expressions. Now, in a one-to-one perspective, that's quite important, right? Because if you're trying to support a line manager or in another difficult conversation, that's going to be really key. There are probably some awkward moments that we experience, I know, on common. So, for example, in the app I mentioned earlier, in spatial, like here, we're distance, but if I suddenly do this, right, you're like, it's a bit weird, uncomfortable. So people have stayed in other people's virtual spaces and inadvertently being presented in positions they probably didn't want to be presented in. There's some stories around that, but I know some of the, so Meta, for example, and other providers are looking at how they can put boundaries in, essentially, to reduce that. So they're some of the ones from me.
And where's is the data going anywhere? I mean, we didn't talk about this before, but just as you were talking, you were sort of talking about that. Like, I'm just thinking, where is all this? Where does it all live? Where is is it being stored somewhere?
In the cloud.
I don't know what that means.
No, I mean, the big proponents of Web 3.0, and in a world where no one owns it, you own it, NFTs, all that kind of fun stuff, blockchain, smart technology, contracts, etc. Fundamentally, at the moment, and this, I wrestled with buying one of these because it's owned by Facebook, and then you have to log in, you have to give your details and your data, which sits with Facebook. But then if you go into if you go into Microsoft Mesh, it's going to sit with Microsoft. If you go into the NVIDIA Omniverse, it's going to sit with NVIDIA. So fundamentally, even though the purists believe that that's where we can get to with the metaverse in the round, your data is sitting somewhere on a server owned by one of the it's not FANG anymore, it's MANG, isn't it? Because Facebook is no longer it's an M rather than, so Meta, Amazon, Netflix, and
right, yes, Google, yeah. God, I can't even think about that. Actually, that's a whole other webinar, I think, entirely. But Hazel has said it is like, actually, once the fad thing has moved forward, as you were saying. I mean, I definitely, when we spoke, it was like very much like, I feel like I'm in a Doctor Strange film, and it is not the metaverse, it is the multiverse, and my head is spinning out. But it's great hearing about how this, the normalization, if you like, and the actual use of it is quite straightforward. But David is saying that and this is, I think, definitely for our HR audience, what's the sort of the most valuable part of working in the metaverse from a learning in HR context? And I think this definitely, from our conversation previously, came out as something that you really felt that was the most beneficial area at the moment.
Yeah, sure, definitely. I think first of all, there's a connection element. People are going to be connected, and that connection might be to other learners. First of all, we know that the science will tell us that folk learn from each other. Peer learning is absolutely critical, but the ability to access an expert in the moment, right, is then not limited to a given room. It can be connected all over. You can integrate with, whether it's, I don't know, a technical aspect of what you're looking to learn in particular. That's absolutely key. We also know that a big part of learning is the experience, because we remember how we feel. We draw upon those experiences to essentially learn. And so if we can simulate environments as closely as possible, I've given a pilot example earlier, we've spoken about a nuclear power station, we could carry on, we could go on, we could be trying to learn to develop your golf skills, anything you can think of, we can replicate that experience, and we can simulate it, and we can have feedback, much more nuanced and detail reliant on data. That is only going to enhance the outcomes of learning. So really passionate about this topic in particular.
And I think to Lloyd's point about the experiential side of things, and again, it comes full circle back to those that have put a headset on and understand what we're talking about. When you step into kind of Horizons, lobby, if you've done the Horizons kind of, this is how you use these things and the headsets to interact. You just sit there going, my goodness, this has got so many potential applications from a learning perspective. But to Lloyd's earlier point, this doesn't mean we should all now plow in and create an e-learning e-learning modules in VR, it has to be the right type of learning to drive the right type of outcomes that you want, and is appropriate for the right people, right? Because there will be some people who go into this environment and hate it and prefer learning the way they've always learned, and that's absolutely absolutely fine. But there'll be others, the next generation of employee, and I hate putting labels on people, but it's going to be that generation where this is more normal, because that's how they play table tennis. We were talking about that before we went on went on air. And there is research out there which backs up the right type of training that has been done through VR. To Lloyd's point, the retention rate is much higher versus this environment or even classroom. And one reason behind that, there's no distractions.
Yeah.
There are no distractions when you put this headsets on. You are in the moment. Versus if it's this environment, you've got Teams, you've got WhatsApp, you've got people with their video off, not really concentrating. Even in a classroom environment, you have that different type of distractions. And on the real estate point, that's the other cool thing about doing it in these environments. You can reorganize the room at the flick of a button, from theatre mode to round table to presenter to this and that. So what's the word I'm looking for? It's limitless in terms of how you can design a learning experience, which you may not be able to have done in the physical world, because we're governed by the laws of physics, right? And buildings and real estate folk internally going, no, I'm not going to change this room around. So but it has to be for the right reasons to drive the right outcomes. Echoing what Lloyd was saying.
Yeah, and I think that's.
I just want to add one little bit about the learning that I mentioned a minute ago. There's a chap called Professor Bob Stone from the University of Birmingham. I did some work with him a couple of years ago. He's really passionate about this topic. I think he might well be retired, but he still speaks a lot on LinkedIn. Follow him. A couple of years ago, he was telling me they were buying smells and scents that could be replicated in VR. Now, from a learning perspective, in a certain type of environment, we know, I don't know if someone's working with gas, and the ability to pick up a nuanced smell is going to be absolutely critical. That's just a taste, if you like, or a flavour of where the technology is going to go. It's not just going to stay in its current state as well. And all of these things are going to help things like learning and some of the other topics we've mentioned as well.
And it's experiential as well. The human brain likes to experience, to learn, rather than just be that 2D told information kind of back and forth. I mean, there's a couple of really good things come through. Tom saying that one of the benefits, the workplace benefits also in a virtual space, is to help people who are neurodivergent be in a more comfortable environment, which I can imagine is actually an area of huge research at the moment. And also, do you have, I mean, I guess this is, again, and we can follow up afterwards on specific questions, but I guess in the sense of actually introducing these, I was speaking to the team and I was like, can you ever imagine us sitting with VR headsets on, communicating in the virtual world? And how can we just simply kind of give some top tips on how to take those headsets and make them part of your daily life?
If I let Alex do one, can I just answer the neurodivergent one?
Oh, sorry, of course, yes, absolutely.
Again, you're right, it's an absolutely fascinating topic. And the evidence is still growing on here, so I don't want to make any big claims, but we do know that exposure therapy, for example, is really important for people to come over, overcome traumatic events and familiarize themselves, and the ability to simulate and granulate, if you like, that exposure therapy near the end of the scale is, I'm really interested on the power that can provide certain individuals as well, from an inclusive perspective.
And only the other day on LinkedIn, I saw that an organisation is looking at how VR can potentially support Alzheimer and dementia patients.
Yeah, I think I saw that.
So there's so many applications that are now starting to kind of come to the surface around what this technology and medium, this is what we're talking about, it's a medium to communicate, to collaborate, to connect. step away from, we can't ignore the metaverse, right? As a parent, one has to be aware of it, and you should learn about it, you should understand it, because it's going to be part of our kids' lives. I have a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old. You know, this will be what they do, right, with their teenagers. There is no two ways about it. But for here and today, buy one of these. If you haven't got one of these, get the company, to Oculus or Hive or what have you, to invest in a couple of headsets. You know, 600 quid. To Lloyd's point, it's cheaper than a flipping iPhone. It's cheaper than the laptops that your companies are currently buying for you. And just give it a go. Try and step away from any preconceptions. Just give it a go. Even if it's playing Beat Saber, even if it's playing ping pong, even if it's doing the training for how to use the headsets, you know yourselves, you know your organizations, you know the challenges you're trying to solve. I hope that you will then start to go, oh, right, I can see how this might work here, or how this might work here. That's the only, like in anything in life, with this, just do it.
Yeah, just do. You have to experience the experience, exactly.
For me, I mean, I've mentioned purpose so far. I mentioned patience, and we just described both of those. And the final one I would act on is people. So consider the change aspect of this, whether that's the folk who are going to go through the headsets, but also if you are a HR director or a head of, you might want to allocate someone in your team to be curious and explore this space. Support them, you know, support them on that journey as well.
Amazing. Well, I feel like I have stepped into a bit of another dimension there. I feel like I have knowledge. I just thank you very much for your time, both in the week, getting my head around this, and today. It's been absolutely fantastic. And we will no doubt see you again. And Lloyd, you are our regular Future of Work tech, everything tech columnist. So look out for Lloyd's next column, which is coming in the next couple of weeks.
Thanks for having us.
So, thanks so much. And just to flag up to everybody who is still online, we are going to just pop a little survey in the chat to see how you enjoyed today's session. We're really keen to keep on bringing you content that's relevant and up to date, and all things of interest to our HR leader community. Talking of which, we have another event, actual in-person event, actual real life, no VR, all actual physical experience in Bristol on June the 9th, which is Culture Clash, bridging the gap between employers and emerging talent. This, as Alexander was saying, the next generation is the future. We really need to invest in them. We will send you some details on that following the close of this session. So all that leaves me to do is say thank you again to our wonderful guests, and we will hopefully see you soon. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.